Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. Abby Hernandez, 14 years old, was walking home from her school in New Hampshire, USA, on an ordinary school day. October 9th, 2013 was a normal day that turned into a tragic turning point for everyone. After finishing school, Abby set out to walk home. The wide, seemingly safe streets would turn into a trap that day. The start of the day Abby went missing was just like any other school day. After lunch, Abby left school and began her walk home. She usually walked home from school, and her family was expecting her to arrive safely as always. However, that day Abby had still not arrived by the time she was supposed to. Her family, realizing Abby was missing, tried to contact her for several hours, and then took the situation seriously and called the police. Upon hearing the news, the police immediately began their search efforts. Abby's family and neighbors intensified their searches in the areas where Abby had gone missing. Within a few hours, it became clear that something was wrong. There were no signs at the place where Abby had disappeared. However, the most tragic part was that no one could determine exactly where Abby had gone missing at that time. As the search continued, some witnesses reported that Abby had been abducted by a vehicle. At that time, a driver, 34-year-old Nathaniel Kibbe, forcibly took Abby into his car and kidnapped her. After taking Abby into his car, Kibbe drove her to a remote area, far from where she had disappeared. This area was an abandoned warehouse isolated from the rest of the world. Abby had almost no chance. No one had seen Kibbe take Abby into his car. Furthermore, during the first few days of Abby's disappearance, no one knew what had happened to her or where she was. In the early days after Abby's disappearance, panic spread among her family and the police. The whole town learned that Abby was missing, and volunteers gathered on every corner to search for her. However, no clues had been found regarding the place where Abby had gone missing. The police intensified their search efforts, investigating every possibility in the area where the missing girl was last seen. Yet, in the first few days, no trace or clue was found about Abby. No one knew where this mysteriously disappeared young girl had gone, or who had abducted her. Although no body or trace of Abby was found when she disappeared, with each passing day, the story of the missing girl left a huge question mark in the minds of the townspeople. Many suspected Abby had fallen into danger and was kidnapped, but no one could say anything for certain. The first days after her abduction were filled with indescribable fear and uncertainty for Abby's family. While they could not receive any information about what had happened to their daughter, they continued to hold on to the hope that she was somehow safe and well, waiting somewhere. The family participated in search efforts trying to uncover the truth behind their child's disappearance. This disappearance would leave a terrible mark on the town and be remembered as an event that left a deep question mark in everyone's mind. Abby Hernandez's disappearance on October 9, 2013, began with a terrifying uncertainty for both her family and the townspeople. That morning, everyone thought Abby had gone to school as usual and would return home safely by the end of the day. But something went wrong. Her disappearance shocked everyone. When her family realized Abby was missing, it was already hours past the time she was supposed to be home. At first, Abby's disappearance, while worrying, was seen as a small missing person incident. However, as time passed and Abby still didn't return, the situation grew much more serious. When her family realized Abby was missing, they immediately contacted the police. A missing person investigation was quickly initiated. The police, based on previous cases of missing people, hoped Abby would be found within a short time. The townspeople and nearby volunteers joined the search efforts. Everyone believed Abby would be safe, thinking she had somehow just gotten lost. Maybe something had happened and Abby was in trouble. But everyone had one question on their minds. Where is she? The police first searched Abby's route, the road she took to school, and the surrounding areas. Search teams carefully combed the areas near where Abby had disappeared, hoping to find any sign of her. However, they found nothing. The teams searching the area where Abby had gone missing did not find any trace evidence or signs of a vehicle. Within a few days, there was still no explanation for Abby's disappearance. The townspeople anxiously asked, "Where is this girl? Neither the townspeople nor Abby's family could figure out what had happened to her or where she was. At first, the police were hopeful that a missing child would be found quickly. When a child goes missing, the search process usually concludes in a short time. However, this time, something was different. As the searches continued, no new information or clues were found regarding Abby's disappearance. The police believed that missing children often left traces in the surrounding areas, sometimes even several kilometers away. However, no sign of Abby was found. At the time, search teams were combing areas near rivers, forests, and abandoned buildings throughout the town. But nothing was discovered. The search efforts made the townspeople even more desperate. Her family just wanted to see some sign of her, but understanding where a missing girl could have gone was proving to be much more difficult. A hidden reality was unfolding. The person behind Abby's abduction was a stranger, and he had left no trace. Over time, this case began to stir deep fear among the townspeople. The police were finding it increasingly difficult to locate the missing child, because finding a missing person typically requires following clues. However, Abby's disappearance had left no clues behind. Every second after Abby's disappearance felt like a dark cloud hanging over the town. The townspeople were anxious, and no one knew how this would end. Meanwhile, Abby's family continued, searching for any glimmer of hope regarding their missing daughter, but nothing was becoming clear. What had happened to Abby? Everyone was waiting for an explanation, but the only thing they received was uncertainty. A week later, after a few days had passed since Abby's disappearance, the police deepened their investigations and began working with expert teams to consider every possibility. However, no one was aware of the real facts. This situation was much more than just a missing person case. Abby had been abducted that day, but no one knew it. 34-year-old Nathaniel Kibbe had abducted Abby, taken her to a warehouse, and held her there for an extended period. Moving secretly and carefully, Kibbe hid every step he took, and whatever happened, he kept Abby's abduction a secret, leaving no trace during the first days of her disappearance. What had once seemed like a normal missing person case slowly turned into a much more terrifying reality for the townspeople. However, at that time, no one knew what was going on. No one could uncover the big secret behind Abby's disappearance in the early days after she was abducted. Abby Hernandez's abduction and captivity had initially been a major trauma for the townspeople and her family. However, when Abby went missing on October 9, 2013, this tragedy had deeper, darker, and more frightening dimensions. Abby spent about 9 months after being abducted under the control of Nathaniel Kibbe, living only according to his will. During this time, Abby's life was shaped first and foremost by Kibbe's desires and decisions. Throughout the long period of secrecy, fear, and bullying, Abby's psychological trauma and emotional destruction deepened day by day. After abducting Abby, Kibbe took her to a secret warehouse. From the outside, the warehouse appeared to be an ordinary abandoned place, but inside, it was filled with Abby's fears and Kibbe's constant desire to dominate her. Kibbe kept Abby under control here and began to exert all kinds of pressure on her. Abby was trapped in this warehouse for an extended period. Although the warehouse was not physically comfortable, it was a place where Kibbe held Abby captive and maintained psychological control over her. This isolation and living under constant threat created deep wounds in Abby's spirit. Kibbe created a constant atmosphere of fear, keeping Abby in captivity. He monitored her every move and imposed strict rules on her every step. However, the most terrifying thing was that Kibbe did not physically abuse Abby. This, in some way, caused Abby to suffer even more psychologically. While applying pressure on Abby, Kibbe simultaneously isolated her further. She was alone 24 hours a day, always under Kibbe's ability to find, watch, and control. The trauma Abby experienced during this time grew both physically and emotionally. Kibbe continuously applied psychological pressure, aiming to break Abby's morale and will. At first, Abby hoped to escape from Kibbe's grasp, but over time, even the idea of escape began to feel like an unreachable goal. Kibbe's methods pushed Abby into an irresolvable physical and psychological state. Abby tried to somehow break free from Kibbe's control, but every attempt ended in failure. Every step, Every movement she made was under Kibby's watchful eye. In the beginning, she had small hopes of escape, thinking perhaps Kibby would make a mistake, but these hopes slowly faded. Each passing day, Abby's spirit became more and more broken because escaping, gaining freedom, seemed like an impossible dream under Kibby's constant surveillance. Kibby's psychological pressures seriously shook Abby's mental health. She had sustained deep mental scars. Any glimmer of hope was constantly extinguished by Kibby. Over time, Abby began to tremble with fear. She feared that anything, a glance, a movement, might trigger Kibby's anger and make him even more dangerous. He had control over her at all times. The time spent in isolation, fear, and uncertainty weakened Abby's psychological resilience. Kibby was manipulating her not only physically but mentally, trapping her in every way. Gradually, Abby's life was completely shaped by Kibby's desires. She felt increasingly helpless, and each time she tried to escape, she felt more trapped. Every day was spent in a reality ruled only by Kibby's decisions and bullying. She was trapped both internally and externally. Despite all this, there was still a small spark of hope within Abby. Although there were moments when she couldn't even admit it to herself, she thought that somehow she could break free from Kibby. There was an inner resistance, but this resistance grew weaker every day in the face of Kibby's power and fear. At first it was a resistance that gave her courage, but over time it was breaking down more and more. For 9 months, Abby fought with her survival instincts in a constant state of fear, control, and loneliness. The pressure Kibby exerted on her created not only physical pain but also deep and insidious psychological effects. Every moment was filled with fear and uncertainty. Unfortunately, during this time, Abby's emotional trauma deepened. She was mentally exhausted, her freedom lost, and she carried fears and pain that she could never share with anyone. The challenges and traumas Abby experienced during this time were among the darkest moments of her life. In the end, these difficult times may have broken Abby's resistance, but some inner strength managed to keep her alive. This was a sign of Abby's fight, that even in what seemed like a hopeless situation, she might find a way to escape. Abby Hernandez had lived in great fear and loneliness for 9 months, spending the darkest and most traumatic days of her life under Kibby's control. Each day, the possibility of her release seemed like a more distant and unreachable dream. However, on July 20, 2014, the fear and pain she had endured came to an end, and at the same time, a great resilience was rewarded. Abby's liberation was a tangible testament to survival, resilience, and courage for both her and those around her. Although the details of her release are still unclear, Abby's moment of freedom seemed to happen all at once. Kibby, who had controlled her for so long and subjected her to heavy physical and psychological pressure, made a decision after 9 months. He decided to let her go. The reasons and motives behind his decision were never clearly explained, but somehow, after this long period of captivity, he left her at a safe location. When Abby was released, she was initially confused and disoriented as she stepped into the outside world again. This was no longer the place where she had been lost for 9 months. Her old life had changed so much since she disappeared. In Abby's mind, the complex emotions she felt with her liberation included both freedom and fear. For her, the outside world had become more alien than ever since the moment she had vanished. She had lived in the warehouse where Kibby had imprisoned her for 9 months, completely cut off from the world. The moment of liberation also marked the beginning of Abby's greatest physical and psychological struggle. After years of psychological pressure and physical captivity, although Abby's body bore no visible marks, her mind carried a heavy burden. Being held captive for such a long period leaves permanent scars not on the body, but on the mental world of the person. The trauma Abby experienced shattered her more with each passing day, shaping every movement, thought, and step with Kibby's fear. And now, she had been given freedom. However, this freedom was not the beginning of a return to her old life. Although it could be said that Abby did not suffer physical weakness or serious injuries, the effects of the trauma she endured were much deeper. While her body may have remained physically intact, she was in the grip of great emotional devastation. For a long time, she had been isolated in the place where Kibby had imprisoned her, trying to survive under his horrific pressure. This loneliness and fear had deeply affected Abby. On one hand, the world that constantly made her feel lost was now a strange foreign place that needed to be rediscovered. After Abby's liberation, an investigation and inquiry were immediately launched. Shortly after her release, Abby was able to provide information about the identity of her captor, Kibby. She confirmed that Kibby was the one who had abducted her, recalling his face. The police quickly began searching for Nathaniel Kibby and working to uncover his crimes. At first, Abby was unable to gather the courage to tell her family or the authorities about what she had gone through. Mentally, she was in such a difficult state that sharing her pain and horror with others felt impossible. However, over time, she was able to give a statement to the police and her family in a safe environment. Abby's trauma was of a kind that could only be healed with psychological help. Abby's liberation was not just a physical freedom, but also the beginning of a rebirth. While trying to recover from the deep scars of the trauma she experienced during the 9 months she was lost, a process had begun in which the person who had held her captive would have to face all the truths. However, alongside all of this, Abby's freedom also succeeded in raising significant societal awareness. It became a beacon of hope for missing children and victims, and public awareness of such events became more sensitive. Ultimately, Abby's liberation was not just a moment of freedom, but the greatest symbol of her resilience and courage. Still, the psychological trauma she had experienced continued to be a part of her life for many years. Her liberation was not just the breaking of a physical chain, but also the breaking of the emotional and psychological chains formed by the years of bullying and captivity. Abby tried to move forward with her life, but dealing with the lasting marks of her trauma was a huge struggle for her. Abby Hernandez's liberation was not just a moment of freedom for her, but a beacon of hope for the entire community. After 9 months of being lost and held captive by Kibby, Abby had finally regained her freedom. But this was just the beginning of the story. Abby's rescue also signified that accountability for what had happened to her had to be addressed. Abby decided to cooperate with the police and confirm who had abducted her. Her courage was a big step for the authorities pursuing the perpetrator, as her statements not only uncovered Kibby's identity, but also laid the groundwork for the legal actions to be taken against him. Immediately after her liberation, the police began their investigation quickly. Abby had recognized Kibby's face, and although it was difficult for her to speak due to the trauma she had experienced, she told the truth despite her fears. Kibby was a 34-year-old man who had occasionally come and gone from the town. The police initially began by investigating potential connections between Abby's disappearance and Kibby's town. Identifying Kibby and learning what kind of harm he could inflict on a missing child became the police's priority. However, tracking Kibby down would not be easy. After kidnapping Abby, he had disappeared, and while police investigations and searches continued, no one knew where he was. Kibby had taken great care to remain hidden and act in a well-planned manner. He had become a missing person, escaping the notice of everyone. The entire town, keeping their suspicions about Kibby being the perpetrator, silently hoped that the police would eventually find him. However, Kibby's efforts to evade capture complicated the investigation. Throughout 2014, efforts to determine the identity of the man who had abducted Abby and the horrors she had faced continued in secrecy. The police followed each clue carefully and examined every suspect. However, tracking Kibby down was not easy. It became clear that Kibby had been hiding somewhere, planning each step and moving around, fearing the police were getting closer, constantly changing locations to stay hidden. As time passed, it seemed that finding him was becoming nearly impossible. However, as 2015 began, the police finally seized the long-awaited opportunity. Early in the year, they were able to locate Kibby's whereabouts through a tip-off and connections to other crimes in the town. Kibby was eventually arrested in 2015 through a large-scale operation. This operation was successful due to the thoroughness of the investigation process conducted after Abby's abduction. Kibby had been in hiding for a long time, but eventually, he was captured by the police and brought to justice. Kibby's arrest brought great relief to the entire town. Abby's family waited with great hope, believing that Kibby would be punished and that accountability for everything Abby had endured would finally be addressed. After Kibby's arrest for kidnapping, the police deepened their investigation into him. Every detail, every statement, and the information provided by Abby played a crucial role in proving Kibby's crimes. After his arrest, Kibby was brought to trial. A series of charges were brought against him: kidnapping, sexual assault, imprisonment, and many more. He had kidnapped Abby, held her captive, and turned her life into a living hell for years, and it was clear that he needed to face justice. Kibby denied his crimes, but thanks to Abby's courage and the meticulous investigation by the police, his crimes were gradually uncovered. Abby's statements played a significant role in the trial, particularly in relation to the charges of imprisonment and kidnapping. Despite the fear and trauma she had endured, Abby had recognized Kibby's face and, through her cooperation with the police, confirmed the identity of the perpetrator. In addition, Abby's testimony was considered the main reason for her survival. The police stated that Abby's courage and determination had played a crucial role in her release and in uncovering Kibby's crimes. Kibby's arrest also represented a form of closure for Abby. As she struggled with the fear and trauma she had experienced, seeing the perpetrator held accountable provided her with a sense of inner peace and security. However, this process was just the beginning. While Abby had witnessed justice being served, she would now have to embark on a long healing journey to erase the traces of her trauma and fears. Abby's brave testimony not only helped expose Kibby's crimes and bring about justice, but also became a light for other missing children and victims. Her story resonated deeply within the community, helping to raise awareness about the search for missing persons. Kibby's arrest and the delivery of justice were tangible results of Abby's survival struggle and courage. Abby Hernandez's life had changed dramatically on October 9, 2013, when at just 14 years old, she transformed from a girl known to her town's residents into a missing young woman. After years of fear and uncertainty, Abby finally regained her freedom on July 20, 2014. However, her liberation was not just a personal victory, it also became an event that inspired society to raise awareness for missing children and victims. Abby's fight for survival, courage, and desire to return to her community became an unforgettable example for those who knew her and for everyone who witnessed this event. The trauma Abby experienced during her time missing deeply affected both her physical and psychological state. This process required a long recovery and personal struggle. Even though she regained her freedom, it was never easy for a person to return to their old life after being lost for so long. The scars of Abby's trauma were deep not only physically, but also mentally and emotionally. Like many victims suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, Abby occasionally feared reliving the terror and pain of the time she had been lost. Loneliness, loss of trust, and the constant threat she had been under left deep scars in her mind. Nevertheless, Abby's survival and liberation turned her into a hero, not just for her family but for the entire community. Society became more aware of the need to take action to raise awareness about missing children. Despite the challenges she faced, Abby's courageous return to the community helped others overcome their indifference to missing individuals and inspired them to raise their voices. After her liberation, Abby took on a mission to inspire others. She worked to raise awareness for missing children like herself and joined organizations that promoted societal awareness for locating missing persons. Abby's continued struggle became a source of hope for many. She had come to understand that society needed to take greater responsibility for missing individuals. Despite her own trauma, Abby worked to create a platform that would help in the search for missing persons by collaborating with associations. These organizations began conducting in-depth research on missing children and organizing educational programs to prevent disappearances. Abby's personal trauma became a wake-up call for society. Questions about missing persons were asked, and conversations about the emotional and psychological effects of such losses began to take place. Despite the trauma she experienced, Abby's recovery journey was incredibly challenging. She had not only survived physically but was also working to heal psychologically. However, the trauma she endured during the 9 months she was missing made her stronger, more resilient, and an inspiring figure for others. She underwent an intensive psychotherapy process to heal mentally. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and the deep emotional wounds from being lost were significant parts of Abby's recovery journey. It was a long-term and ongoing battle that required constant effort. Nevertheless, Abby fought with great determination and resilience to rebuild herself. She became a leader in taking significant steps for finding missing persons in society. Many charitable organizations and groups aimed at assisting families of missing individuals were inspired by Abby's story and accelerated their efforts. Educational programs aimed at locating missing persons raised more awareness throughout the community. Abby became known not only for her own experience but also for her determination to help others. Her efforts went beyond a simple survival story. They turned into a mission to save lives and amplify the voices of missing individuals. Abby's recovery process gradually gained more strength over time. Although it was not easy to erase the scars of the pain and trauma she had experienced, she continued to heal and help others day by day. Her inner strength and determination to contribute to society gave hope to many people. Abby's return to her community became a turning point for raising awareness about missing children and victims. More efforts were made in society to find missing persons, and steps were taken to prevent such incidents from happening in the future. Despite all she had been through, Abby continued to use her strength to give back to the community. In conclusion, Abby Hernandez's terrifying experiences and the recovery process that followed not only impacted her own life, but also affected the entire community. She was not just a young girl who had survived, she had become a hero, embodying courage, perseverance, and social responsibility. Despite the trauma Abby had lived through, her ability to create awareness and push for more action regarding missing individuals became her greatest success. Her story has become an inspiring source not only for missing children, but also for victims around the world.